Hello, my friends. My name is Adam, and I'm on a quest to be the most prolific reviewer of all time. And I usually review books, movies, television shows, but occasionally I review computer games. And I thought it would be sort of a neat idea to play through all of the games of a specific franchise. And the one that I started with was Europa Universalis because I think it's a very deep game, a very deep franchise, but it's very frustrating for me. So I saw on Steam that they had a winter sale, so I got Europa Universalis 3 for about $2. So that's the one that I started with. And basically my process was I was streaming the whole campaign. My idea was to start in the beginning and then end in the end. And according to Wikipedia, there are a couple of different expansions. There's four different expansions. Napoleon's Ambition and In Nomine, and the version that I had those two expansions, and there's one called Heir to the Throne, and the other one is called Divine Wind. So each of those expansions does different things, but the main idea is that the first two expansions kind of take the starting time back in the past, so 1399, and expand the campaign to 1821. So I started in do 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 do. I started in 1399. I was trying to look at the dates, I didn't find it. 1399, and I finished in 1821. But and in total, the whole process took me maybe about 30 hours, and I rage quitted a bunch of times. So I'll explain why I rage quit a few times in a moment. But if you don't know the Europa Universalis franchise, basically it's civilization really ramped up. So I started playing, my computer journey was by, I started by playing, you know, Civilization, I think 2 and 3, and that was sort of my introduction to strategy games. But Civilization is basically you plop cities down on the map and then you make decisions and then you expand your civilization. And Europa Universalis is the map, for the most part, at least in Eurasia and Africa, is actually already populated with people because that's what it was like in real life, and to a lesser part in the Americas. And you choose one nation, and you can build up the military, you can have diplomatic alliances, you can, you know, have royal marriages, you can choose the type of government your 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 country has. And for the purpose of this review, I picked Spain, which is the one of the easiest countries to. Well, actually, I started with France because that was easier, and then through not understanding the concept of annexation, I made everybody mad with me, and the game was impossible to play because every time I did a war or any kind of aggressive diplomatic action, my reputation was very dishonorable, so everybody would attack me. So I had, like, in a span of like a decade, I had two major wars against the regional powers, being Burgundy, Castile, and England. So that wasn't very nice. So yeah, so anyway, I went back to Spain, and I think I rage quit once with Spain as well. But I went to Spain, and then I slowly conquered Africa, and then I moved on to colonizing South America and North America. By the time I got around to colonizing North America, it had been mostly taken over by Aragon. And in the game, there's so basically what happens if you're Spain in real life is around 14, I don't know, 50 something. There's a wedding between Aragon and Castile, and that creates Spain, actually. But in my game, it never happened, even though I secured succession to the Aragonese throne. So I should have inherited it, but I didn't. So I don't know why that happened. So the entire game, Aragon was my biggest competitor. I Portugal randomly attacked me for some reason, so I annexed half of them, and I survived that war, and then eventually decided to annex all of Portugal, which caused problems. So maybe I'm getting a little bit into the weeds of my campaign. So maybe let's talk about the problems that I see with the game. So first of all, I set the difficulty to very easy because I'm not like a great gamer. I don't know strategies like I'm an old man, so I don't want things to be very difficult. I just want things to be enjoyable, especially when you're playing a game. So I set it to very easy and no inflation, because if you have inflation, then your game is like completely different, and especially with Spain, it will ruin the run for you. But so the problem with very easy in a Paradox game, especially this franchise, and especially probably all of the installments of the franchise, but this one especially, is that it it's not very easy at all. First of all, you can't. So I prepared really well for a battle with Aragon, but I guess my armies weren't very advanced, and they basically destroyed me in the colonies, even though I destroyed them mostly in Spain. So I completely crushed them in Spain, and it was really, really hard. And I think during the course of that war, I annexed Portugal. And then after, I had all of these rebellions which were not really connected to the campaign in Europe, because all of the people had been recruited from Spain who died in Spain. So I had a few rebellions in Spain, which makes sense. But there were rebellions in Mali and West Africa, because, as I said, I controlled all of Africa mostly. So there were rebellions throughout Africa, religious rebellions, nationalist rebellions. There were rebellions in North American colonies and the South American colonies. And it was really difficult because I ran out of men, and so I was like really, really struggling to put down all these rebellions, and Mali became independent again, so I had to invade it again and conquer it again. And that was really, really difficult. And I think that it did not make any sense. And the other thing is like your stability. So the game has this stability mechanic. So if your stability is higher, then theoretically revolts and rebellions should be less frequent. But the game can randomly reduce your stability because of things like comets. You know, it's kind of funny, like you have two choices, and no matter which choice you choose, then the stability goes down. But also in the game, and I think this happens for all kind of big European powers, right before the time of the French Revolution, it doesn't matter how you're actually governing the country. There's huge rebellions and huge unhappiness, and the stability goes down, which if it's a simulation game, your choices should have an effect on the results. It shouldn't be just like random. And I think I took off the historically lucky nations thing because also there's like a thing, an option for historically lucky nations, which doesn't make a lot of sense. So the the difficulty the main problem I have with the game is that very easy is not very easy, and the difficulty, like, you can be coasting along for hundreds of years and then your stability falls apart and you have all of these rebellions everywhere that you have to deal with, which is horrible, really horrible. And another thing which I think maybe they changed in future versions is they have sometimes it seems like infinite infinite rebels. So, well, infinite rebels, and by that I mean two things. In the beginning, even if your army is like 10 times bigger than a rebel army, the rebels will rise up in one town, let's say Madrid, and you go to Madrid and you defeat them, and then they'll go to another town and they'll besiege that town. You'll go to that town, you'll defeat them. They'll go back to Madrid, besiege Madrid, you'll defeat them. And I think I counted once, it took like 8 times for one of this. And it's ridiculous because, the rebels start out with 1,000 men, and then they have 500, and then they have 250, and then they have 25. And even if they have 25, they're still besieging your town, which doesn't make a lot of sense. You would think with, like, in real life, one big battle would be it for a rebellion, or like a couple. Like, especially if you say, okay, they're besieging this, and that's another thing too, which these games don't do very well, and I know the game would be like really, really complicated and unwieldy if you actually had battle strategy, but it's all this like D&D, like rolling of dice, and you can actually see the dice rolling to determine which units will win. There's no real strategy. It's just bigger units, more advanced units against weaker, less advanced units. And even if you do something like a pincer movement and you try to trap the this happened once. There was a rebellion in Luanda, and I took an army from the north and an army from the south, which were bigger collectively than the army in the middle. But because each of those armies was smaller individually, the fact that I trapped them doesn't have any bearing on the motivation of the defenders, and I lost. So that doesn't make a lot of sense, this like going back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, and there's no real strategy connected to warfare in this game. I mean, there's grand strategy connected to warfare, but like there's no strategy connected to specific battles in the game, which, this is not just the problem of this franchise, it's the problem of a lot of franchises like Civilization, which I could talk about a lot because that's probably the franchise that's disappointed me the most in strategy gaming. But anyway, back to this. I forgot what I called it, but yeah, the infinite rebel problem. The other thing is that the other thing that I don't like in this game is that if you have low stability, rebellions will come up, even if those rebellions are not your fault whatsoever. They will come up, and the way that they'll come up is really strange because you'll have like a colony, let's say somewhere in Brazil, and you look at the population, there's like 125 people in that town, and yet they'll have rebels pop up, and they'll have like a 5,000 men, unit of rebels or revolutionaries right there from this town that has 125 people. And in peace times, you can't recruit any militia from that place. So why is it that they can recruit? Like, that mechanic seems remarkably broken. So other things that seem broken in this edition of the franchise are they have decisions. You have so basically on the kind of menu, you have decisions that you can make, like national decisions that you can make, and there's basically like click to make the decision or not. So you can convert your religion, you can do all of this stuff, and they have like consequences. And that's another thing. Oh, maybe I'll remember that, but okay, speaking of decisions that have consequences, there's sometimes you get these like prompts where, and this happened to me twice in a row, where you have this experts are divided, are forts the way, or should we concentrate on offense? And no matter which you choose, your stability goes down. Which, why? I mean, I can understand maybe a comet would decrease your stability because of, superstition and stuff. But why would choosing to prioritize forts or offense actually affect your stability? It doesn't make any sense. It just seems like the developers put that in to be mean. And that happened to me twice. So basically, I had a bunch of rebellions after that because military theorists were having heated arguments about what the way forward was. It doesn't make sense to me. But anyway, what I was gonna say before is that when you have like this menu about provincial decisions, and you can't actually say no. So you just have the city, and then there's like provincial decision, and you click on it, and because you clicked on it, it said yes. So if you don't actually, like, the only option is never to make any decisions in any provinces ever, which seems broken. Another thing that is a little bit broken is, God, towards the end of the game, I had this problem where I think one, I had two wars in the last 400 years or 300 years of the campaign. And one was because I was allied with Scandinavia and they kept on trying to invade Northern Europe. And so they'd be like, oh, we're attacking this little town in the Holy Roman Empire. Will you help us? So I was like, yes. And those also, it doesn't make any sense, this thing too, where your stability drops if you attack a country that is your own culture. Like in the history of Europe, did the French really care if you attacked the English when they were both Catholics? I don't think so. So that's a bit weird. Yeah, but then so Swahili, I had one battle against Swahili and I conquered most of their territory, but they were being guaranteed by the Mamluks, so I attacked them again and basically made them, because I wasn't able to annex them, even though they only had three provinces. That's another thing that's effed up, because sometimes you can annex completely a country if they have three provinces, four provinces, but you also might have defeated them entirely in your war score, because there's like a war score thing, and war score means you can demand like provinces and stuff. So your war score could be 100%, and full, like taking two provinces is like 5% in one war, but you can't take the main province because, oh no, you can't do that because reasons. It doesn't make any sense. But yeah, the thing that I was about to complain about, but it took me a while to get to, is so I had like three wars and I was doing investing in like the little provinces and stuff, like building markets and forts and, all of the things that should make people happy. And then towards the end of the game, because we have like this revolution stuff, that also happens in South America. But I put all of my revolutions down. So every rebellion was dealt with. But Aragon or Catalonia was, they had, they had conquered the Incas, so they had Peru, And in that little place where Ecuador is and up towards Panama, the English had a colony. And so England was going to the dogs, and there were like a bunch of rebellions in different places. And so the English colonial empire fell apart. First in North America, so Louisiana became independent, which was weird because I actually was in control of Louisiana. I mean, like they my Louisiana didn't become independent. It was more like Florida and Georgia and all of that. And then the United States was independent. Quebec was independent, which had a cool flag. It had like the nationalist flag of the rebellions of 1836, which is a great callback to history. Also Canada. So it was like Canada, United States, but none of these places were where they were in real life. They were like Canada was in New England, and Quebec was in upper Canada and in Acadia, and then the United States was patchy all over the place. But during this period, also Colombia became independent, and so I was in control of some provinces in Colombia because I had colonized them, right? And there was no rebellions in my province, but because the English couldn't keep control of their province, Colombia's five provinces or whatever became independent, and then I was at war with Colombia. So being at war with Colombia, I took most of Colombia, but of course I couldn't annex it entirely because of the reason I mentioned earlier, whatever reason that is. And because I was at war, my stability went down, even though I didn't do anything. And so I had all these rebellions in Africa, which were connected to what was happening in Colombia, whereas I never sent any armies. Like maybe I sent, actually, no. I sent like maybe a few units in the beginning. Well, I'll talk about that, why that happened in a moment. But so I sent a few units in the beginning, but none of the units were from Africa, right? So why did they rebel? Because of what was happening in Colombia. So that happened one time. And it happened again a few decades later with Peru. So Peru becomes independent, and again, there's like five provinces of mine, or four, or maybe like three, that become independent and part of Peru. So I'm at I'm at war with Peru, and so Peru and Colombia, they became independent from England, and Aragon, as I mentioned, had most of Peru. So Aragon also was at war with Peru, and they invaded Peru, and I was invading Peru. And so Aragon invaded like one colony I had like invested, one part of Peru that I invested a lot of money in. And so they did a peace with Peru, and they annexed that part of Peru, which cut my empire off from the sea in South America. So that was great. That was lovely. And then I annexed the rest of Peru. And of course, because I was at war, there were a bunch of other rebellions everywhere, which I had to put down again and again and again and again and again. And I can't emphasize enough that I was playing the very easy mode. Very easy, no inflation, AI aggression, down to nothing. So I don't know why that happened. Like, it's crazy. But the one thing that is maybe better than, it's weird, better than, at least in EU4, is that, well, let's talk about the colonization mechanic. So the first colonization, so first in EU4 is that you have a set amount of colonists, and when the colonies, so you can set up a colony, and then you can send your colonists to somewhere else and set up another colony. And you can, as long as you're defending your colonies, they'll grow organically, which makes a lot of sense. But in this one, you get X amount of colonists. And so when you send your colonists to different places, you don't get them back. You just get like one colonist or two colonists every year, depending on whatever national ideas you have. So you get one or two colonists every year. And in the difference though, and it's a really big difference, is so in my campaign I was just playing, and then I thought that I realized that other countries were exploring more than I was, and it was like, oh, you've discovered this. Oh, and also I hate that like notification, like, oh, you've discovered Florida. How can we exploit this knowledge? And like, if Florida's uninhabited, sure, but then you get information about Manitoba, which is colonized by the French. So how am I going to exploit that knowledge about Manitoba, whatever? But anyway, what you can do in this game is that you can send colonists to places where you don't have any units. So basically what happened is I was focusing on Africa. I wanted like Africa to be Spanish. And then I kept getting notifications about South America. So it was like, okay. So I started colonizing South America, and it was like pretty successful. And then I was like, oh, I don't have anything in North America. So I'll go Louisiana. And basically I was like the last major European power to colonize North America. And I ended up getting most of the American Midwest, Louisiana, and most of Texas. So pretty major area of North America. I would be wealthy in oil right now if the Spanish Empire of my world stayed together and didn't collapse. And I can kind of understand, like, I don't know. I think that they're trying to balance historical realism with gameplay. And I think, like, maybe there should be a mode in these games where you're like, historically realistic things. So if you have, too many colonies, or colonies will ultimately try to rebel against you, that would be fine. But I think if you're just playing for fun, it's really, really frustrating. Okay. I think that I talked about everything. Um, Yeah, I can't think of anything else that's like a major problem with the game. Did I like the game? Um, I think it is pretty interesting to see how Europa Universalis, like this is the first game with this Clausewitz engine. So it's interesting to see how it's developed over the years. So it's kind of like going back in time and being a gamer archaeologist. Oh, that would be a good name for a channel. So it's interesting, but I think frankly, and it's interesting to kind of like play the game as Spain and imagine, you know, how history changes if, Spain controlled all of Africa. So basically, I controlled the slave trade, and then I abolished it relatively early. I mean, I didn't get a choice to do that. It just came up like, do you want to abolish the slave trade? And then, it's interesting to think about like, well, I think that my empire is better because I'm like doing this, but then you're executing all of these rebels. Like, yeah. Yeah, so it's fun. It's fun like that. But then I think the problem is because they want kind of historical accuracy, they don't actually get there because one, battles are not, there's no strategy for battles. It's just numbers versus numbers and a bit of random chance. That's one thing. And the other thing is like, you can't actually, like, there's probably like exploits that you can do. I know in EU4, there's all of these things that you can do for a world conquest. And it's basically like start as this country, then change to that country and do this and do that. But again, it's all about like the levels of difficulty. So very easy, as I keep saying, should be very easy and even a little bit boring because then you want more challenge, right? It shouldn't be like your empire almost falls apart like 5 times, or you're playing France and you can't even dominate your own country because people don't like because you have a dishonorable reputation because you attacked Brittany, you know. So that doesn't. I think that ultimately it doesn't work for me as a game. Like it's a game I can come like I spent, as I said, about 30 hours, and I don't think that I'm going to go back to the game. I'm going to do a review of EU4 now, and it's going to be like basically the same, except more modern, I would imagine. But I don't know. What do you think about this game? Have you played it? Did you grow up with it? What do you think about it? Because like my feelings are mixed. I'd say like 6 out of 10, probably for the whole franchise. But I'm gonna try and play every as I said every iteration of the franchise and see what I think. So for EU3, just by itself, because of all of the wonky, broken mechanics of many things, that gives 4 - 4, but it is pretty remarkable simulation of history. So I'd give it like for that I'd give it 6. So I think 6 is a really good mark. All right. Uh, as I said, let me know in the comments what you think about EU3, and if you like what I'm doing. I'm trying to get to 500 subscribers by the end of March, and we already have 401. So thank you very much for everyone for that. And if you're listening on Spotify, please give me a follow. Thank you. Bye bye.